Well, good afternoon. Good to see all of you again this evening. Had a good afternoon class this afternoon at 4 o'clock with the basic Bible principles and all of that. And so if you weren't able to make it, we hope that you'll be able to next week because it was a great study. Really enjoyed it. It's also a chance for you to ask questions. If there's something that you've got a question about that doesn't make sense, or you wonder or have wondered about it and wonder what the Bible answer is, we're striving to answer those as well. So we hope that you'll be able to come to that and enjoy that class with us. This evening, we're taking a lesson from the book of Job. And the book of Job is one of my favorite books, along with Proverbs. I like the wisdom literature and how those are aligned, but I love Job. I love the book of Job. I love everything that's within it, about the glimpses into heaven that we get. Of course, my background in science, I love the science that's in the latter part of the book and all that type of stuff. But Job is just a great, great example. And we mentioned before, I think it was on a Wednesday night, a little Devo or something, where we mentioned, it was Wednesday night class, Job 19:25, where we talked about how Job knew Christ was coming, how that there would be a Redeemer that would stand in the latter day upon the earth. And he said there, from where that song comes from, that we just sang, if you looked underneath the title of that song in the songbook, it had the verse, Job 19:25, underneath it. That he knows that his Redeemer lives. And that's where this is coming from this evening. So as we look into the life of Job, we're going to get into some background first, and then we're going to get into what led up to this phrase where he said, I know that my Redeemer lives. What led him into that thought? And it's a beautiful thought indeed, and has many great things, not only for them, but also for us today. So we're going to notice that this evening. Number one, as we get some background into where all this started, we need to go back to the beginning of Job's life, and we're going to notice first that Job lost everything. I mean, he lost all those things that were dear to him, all those things that he had worked for, had been blessed with, they all vanished from him. As we start this morning, or this afternoon rather, notice Job chapter 1. I want to read just a few verses as we start, and then we'll get into some of the points here under this. But Job chapter 1, verse number 1, notice what's said here. There was a man in the land of Uz, whose name was Job, and that man was perfect and upright, or complete and upright, and one that feared God and eschewed evil. He shunned away from evil things. And there were born unto him 7 sons and 3 daughters. Verse 3, his substance also was 7,000 sheep and 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen and 500 she-donkeys, and a very great household, so that this man was the greatest of all the men of the east. So notice this man, Job. You've got a righteous man, one who is said to be perfect or complete and upright, one who turned away from evil. But notice the blessings he had. He had all these material blessings, but he also had those spiritual blessings in being an upright man of God, being blessed in that sense. But then you have Satan enter the picture in verses 6 and following. And Satan goes before God. He's required to come and give an account of what he's been doing before God. And God and Satan have this discussion about Job. And Satan, we're not going to read all this text for time's sake, but Satan says, God, you've blessed Job so much, there's no way that he would ever leave you because you've blessed him too much. And God returns and says that gives Satan leave to go and to start taking things away from Job. He just can't kill Job, as we'll see. But he starts to take these things away from Job, and we'll notice what happened as he took these things away. But notice what happened in verses 14 and 15. Job lost everything. He lost his oxen, his donkeys, and those servants. Look at verses 14 and 15. And there came a messenger unto Job, and said, the oxen were plowing, and the donkeys feeding beside them, And the Sabaeans, a wild nomadic tribe, fell upon them and took them away. Yea, they have slain the servants with the edge of the sword, and I only am escaped alone to tell thee. So a servant comes to Job and says, all those yoke of oxen, all those donkeys that you had for your work, they've all been captured or killed and taken away by this tribe of people, and all the servants that were with them have all been killed, and I'm the only one left. But then notice next, in verse 16, while he was yet speaking. So you've got this first servant. He tells Job that your oxen, donkey, and servants, they've all been killed and are taken away. And while he was still telling Job this, another servant comes and tells him your sheep and your servants watching them have been taken away as well. While he was yet speaking, there came also another and said, the fire of God is fallen from heaven, and hath burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I only am escaped alone to tell thee. And it's strange that it uses the phrase, the fire of God. We don't know exactly what that is, but what it looks like from, if you look at the 10 plagues of Egypt and other parts of the Bible, where it talks about fire of God from heaven, what it's normally talking about is lightning. And so it's likely that's what's being talked about here. Some type of lightning was used to slay these sheep and these servants, some type of storm that came and killed all them. But the point is that Job now has lost all those sheep that he had. He lost all the servants watching them, but it doesn't stop there. Verse 17, notice, while he was yet speaking, so now you've got another servant that comes while the last one is still talking, and he comes and he says, there also came another and said, the Chaldeans made out 3 bands, so another band of people, and they fell upon the camels and have carried them away. Yea, and slain the servants with the edge of the sword, and I only am escaped alone to tell thee. So now his camels and the servants watching them have been taken or killed, and so notice what's happening. Thing after thing is being taken away from Job. He had all these oxen, all these donkeys, all these sheep and camels and servants, and now one after the other, just back to back to back. It's not like Job lost one thing and then 10 years later he lost another. While one servant was speaking, another one would come and say, this has happened as well. And so it's back to back to back bad news, but that's not even the worst part of it yet. Notice what happens next. Verses 18 and 19, Job loses his children. While he was yet speaking, so this servant comes while the other servant's still speaking. This is back to back to back. There came also another and said, thy sons and thy daughters were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house. And behold, there came a great wind from the wilderness and smote the 4 corners of the house. And it fell upon the young men, and they are dead. And I only am escaped alone to tell thee. And so you've got that Job's children were all together, and some have said that this was some type of sinful party that these children were a part of. But if you go back to verse number 4, it says, and his sons went and feasted in their houses, every one his day, and sent and called for their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. What that's talking about in the original language, and as you read that, it's talking about each one his day. That's their birthday. Every time they had a birthday, they would celebrate at one of the brothers' houses. And they would all come together and celebrate this birthday. And so they were in one of their houses celebrating one of the children's birthdays. And this storm comes and smites the house, and it actually crushes the children. And so now they've all perished as well. But it wasn't some wild, evil, sinful party they were a part of. I mean, their father was Job, a just and upright man. I think his children were likely following in his example. At least we hope so. But there's nothing, that word wine, you can get into a discussion of wine. It literally just talking about, it could be anything from grape juice to alcoholic wine. But with Job and his character, likely this was not an alcoholic type of wine from the context. But in any respect, his children were dead. I mean, he lost his children. So he's lost all these material things, and now he's lost his children, but it doesn't stop there. He also lost his health. Job chapter 2, verses 7 and 8. Satan went back, and if you go back to verse number 21, before we get to that, Job lost all these things, including his children. Notice what he said in verse 21 of chapter 1. And said, naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all this Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. So Job lost all these different things. He even lost his children, and he still blessed the name of God. So Satan lost. So he goes back to God and says, let me touch Job's person. And so God allows Satan to afflict Job's health. He can't kill Job, but he can affect his health. And notice what he did. Chapter 2, verses 7 and 8. So Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord and smote Job with sore boils from the sole of his foot unto his crown, the top of his head. And he took him a potsherd to scrape himself withal, and he sat down among the ashes. I don't know if you've ever had a boil. A boil is not a fun thing to have. Job had boils from the bottom of his feet to the top of his head. And he literally took a clay pot, broke it, and of course if you break a clay pot, you've got very sharp edges, and he took one of those and was scraping his skin off to get the boils off. That's how bad it was for Job. And he sat in the ashes, which was a sign of mourning, and of course you would be if you had lost all these things. But you know what? I didn't put this on the outline, but you might want to add it. Job, in a sense, also lost his wife. If you look at verse number 9, then his wife said unto him, dost thou still retain thine integrity? Curse God and die. Verse 10, but he said unto her, thou speakest as one of the foolish women speaketh. What? Shall we receive good at the hand of God, and shall we not receive evil? In all this did not Job sin with his lips. So Job stayed faithful. Now most people will give a really bad name to Job's wife. They'll say how wicked of a person she was. But you got to think about what Job's wife lost too. Job's wife, of course, she had been married to this man, and she had all these possessions were part of her as well, and she's lost all these things as well. But not only that, she lost her children. Now, I've got a special connection with my daughter, but you know what? There's an even more special connection between a child and its mother. There's something there that a father doesn't have. I don't know what it is, but God has placed it there that a child has a special connection to a mother, and a mother to her child. And Job's wife just lost her 10 children too. You can see how she would be in this state. But not only that, she's lost the husband she once knew. She has this man who is the best man in the country. I mean, he's the top man. He's the best guy in all this land. And now he's been reduced to nothing. So the man she once knew has basically gone to nothing as well. So you can see where Job's wife had a lot of things that would lead her to this statement. So I don't think we just need to shrug her off as an evil woman. She was suffering too. And we read throughout the book of Job, and you get to the end, and Job doesn't take another wife. He keeps his same wife. So I think she came to the realization that God blesses in everything as well, and that she, like Job, was restored with the fullness of that knowledge of God. But we don't just need to write her off. But Job, in a sense, lost his wife as well for a little while as she suffered with all this depression from these things also. But just notice, Job lost everything. I mean, all that he had, all these things that he had, it was all gone. And you know what? Job felt like he didn't have any hope. Number 2 this afternoon. Job felt like he had no hope. And I mean, you look at what Job went through, would you have hope? Would you feel like there's still something better out there for you? I mean, it would be very hard to see that. So Job, for a while, felt like he had no hope. Look at Job chapter 9, verses 32 and 33. Notice here, Job saw that there was no one to stand between himself and God. Okay, there was no one there. Job 9, 32 and 33. Look at what he says. For he, talking about God, is not a man as I am, that I should answer him, and we should come together in judgment. So what Job is saying is, I'm down here, God's up there. I can't go to God and say, you know what, God, you should have done it this way. Because God's not a man. God is God. And then verse 33, he says, also, neither is there any daysman betwixt us, that might lay his hand upon us both. So here's Job's situation. All this evil has happened to Job. Job looks and he sees God, and he says, I can't condemn God for this because he's God, but there's no way for me to even get to God because there's no one in between us. He feels like he's in a hopeless situation. Here's God, here's me, and there's this great gulf between us. And what am I going to do about it? And Job felt like there was nothing that he could do. There was no daysman betwixt him and God. There was no one to stand in that gap for him. So as we look at this, Job knew that he needed a daysman. What that word daysman literally means is a kinsman redeemer. A kinsman redeemer. And where we can see this is actually in the book of Ruth. So if you will go with me to the book of Ruth, we're going to notice what this idea of a kinsman redeemer is, because we need to know what that is as we talk about this with Job. We need to know what a kinsman redeemer is. So go to the book of Ruth and look at chapter 4. We got to get a little bit of history here. Okay, so kinsman, that of course means that it's someone who's related to you, and a redeemer is someone who buys something back. So whenever Job says he needs a daysman, he says, I need someone who's related to me that can basically buy me back to God. Okay, but whenever we look at that, we get the expression of this in the book of Ruth. Go there and look at Ruth chapter 4. We're going to read verses 1 through 10 and read what a kinsman redeemer is. Then went Boaz. Okay, so we've got this man named Boaz, and if you remember the story of Ruth, he was the one who had the fields where Ruth came to glean from the fields. But he went up to the gate and sat him down there. And behold, the kinsman of whom Boaz spake came by, unto whom he said, Ho, such a one, turn aside, sit down here. And he turned aside and sat down. So they were in the gate. This is where a lot of the different political and economic things would happen in the city. And he tells this kinsman, come over here and sit down so we can figure this out. Verse 2, and he took him 10 men of the elders of the city and said, sit ye down here. And they sat down. So we needed some witnesses for this. So we get some elders of the city for his witnesses. Number 3, or verse 3 rather, he said unto the kinsman, Naomi, okay, Naomi was the one who had left. She was a Jewess and then lost her husband and sons and came back with Ruth. That is, come again out of the country of Moab. She selleth a parcel of land, which was our brother Elimelech's. That was her husband who had passed away. So you've got Naomi. She had gone into the land of Moab. Her husband and children died. Now she's come back to the country of Israel, and she has a parcel of land. But being a woman, she didn't have all the rights of the man, and so she needed someone to help her here. She needed that kinsman redeemer. So look at verse number 4. And I thought to advertise thee, saying, buy it before the inhabitants and before the elders of my people. If thou wilt redeem it, redeem it. But if thou wilt not redeem it, then tell me, that I may know, for there is none to redeem it beside thee, and I am after thee. And he said, I will redeem it. So you've got this man who would be next in line by relation to redeem the land for Naomi. And Boaz asked him that he needs to redeem the land, and if he won't redeem it, then Boaz is next in line. So you've got this line of people here to redeem this land. But verse number 5, then said Boaz, what day thou buyest the field of the hand of Naomi, thou must buy it also of Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of the dead, to raise up the name of the dead upon his inheritance. So you have to have Ruth as well. Verse number 6, and the kinsman said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I mar mine own inheritance. Redeem thou my right to thyself, for I cannot redeem it. So if this man had redeemed this parcel of land, then he would have messed up his own inheritance. So he says, I can't redeem that land. I can't buy it back because it's going to mess up the land I already have. So I'm just not going to buy it. So what happened then is that it passes to Boaz, because he would be the next one in line. Verse number 7, now this was the manner in former time in Israel concerning redeeming and concerning changing. For to confirm all things, a man plucked off his shoe and gave it to his neighbor, and this was the testimony in Israel. So they had this thing they did where if you were going to buy the land, you would take your shoe off and give it to the neighbor, and that was like a handshake today. Okay, that sealed the deal. Okay, that's what they would do. They would take off a shoe and pass it to someone. Okay, verse 8, therefore the kinsman said unto Boaz, buy it for thee. So he drew off his shoe. So they sealed this deal. Verse number 9, and Boaz said unto the elders and unto all the people, ye are witnesses this day that I have bought all that was Elimelech's and all that was Chilion's and Mahlon's at the hand of Naomi. Verse 10, moreover Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of Mahlon, I have purchased to be my wife, to raise up the name of the dead upon his inheritance, that the name of the dead be not cut off from among his brethren, and from the gate of his place ye are witnesses this day. So notice what happened here. You've got Naomi and Ruth. Okay, they needed someone, they needed a man in the picture to purchase this land for them, to buy it back. The nearest kinsman said, I don't want to do it. So it passed down to Boaz, and Boaz said, I will redeem it. So what Boaz did is he became a kinsman redeemer. He was related to the family, and he bought back the land that was theirs for them. Okay, that's where this term kinsman redeemer comes from. Okay, that's where it's literally used. And Boaz is actually a type, he's a shadow of Christ. Because we're going to see in just a little while that Christ would be our kinsman redeemer. He would buy us back to God. But Boaz is the picture of that. He was the one willing to buy back the land, willing to buy back Ruth and Naomi, and to give them the position they once knew. Okay, but he was a kinsman redeemer. But Job needed that. He said, I don't have one of those. I don't have one to fill that gap for me. But he knew he needed one. So look at the picture here. You've got Job. Okay, Job saw himself as he was, that he was simply a man from the dust of the earth. You go back to Genesis chapter 2 and verse number 7, it says that God took the dust of the earth and fashioned man from it and breathed into him, into his nostrils, the breath of life. So man came from the dust of the earth, and that's where Job sees himself right now. He says, here I am, a man made of the dust and the earth, and I cannot get before God on his throne. Okay, I can't match up to that. I love the picture in Revelation 4 and verse number 3, where it says, as God is sitting on his throne, you've got the crystal sea before him, but over the throne there's a rainbow like unto shining emerald. Okay, imagine the majesty of that. Imagine the beauty of that. So you've got God on high on his throne with the emerald rainbow around him, sitting in majesty, and then you've got Job, a man of the dust of the earth. How can he compare to that? And the thing is, he can't. Okay, he can't compare to God. He can't go to God and say, you should have done it this way. Because God's up there in his majesty, and Job's down here made of the dust of the earth. So Job felt that he no hope. And you can see that. If you have that mindset of yourself with God, which I think we all need to take a self-check and see if we have that type of reverence for God. Do I see God as someone high and lifted up far above man, or have I drawn him down to the level of man as so many have done today? God is not on our level. He's not. I don't talk to him like he's on my level. God is high and mighty, lifted up far above heaven and earth. That's where God is. And I am of the dust of the earth. And you know what? If that was simply the case, then we would have no hope today. But, Job 19:25. So let's continue. Job felt he had no hope, but Job saw that help would come. Okay, it didn't end there. It didn't stop with no hope. And I'm very glad it didn't stop there. Because if it stopped with Job having no hope, we would have no hope today. But notice what happened. Job 19:25. Job, through inspiration, saw that a Redeemer would come. He saw that a Redeemer would come. Notice what he says in Job 19:25. For I know Not I guess or I suppose or I think, but I know that my Redeemer liveth, and that he shall stand at the latter day upon the earth. Job was able to look through inspiration to a day when someone would come and would be able to be that Redeemer for us. See, Job, he saw himself and there was no one in between. But he was able to see down the timeline to Jesus the Christ and to see that there would finally be someone to stand in the gap between man and God and to put his hand on God's shoulder and on man's shoulder and bridge that gap for us. Job saw that help would come. You know, the one coming, he had to be a kinsman. We talked about how a daysman is a kinsman redeemer. Well, the one coming would have to be a kinsman. And when we talk about Jesus the Christ, was he a kinsman to us? Look at John chapter 1, verse 14. John 1:14. And the Word, you go back to the first verse, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So we know that this Word is God, but the Word was made flesh. Okay, so that's Jesus Christ, and dwelt among us. And we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. But notice what the Word did. Notice what Jesus did. He became flesh. Is Jesus a kinsman to mankind? He is. He became flesh. He came and took the form of a man. Okay, so he's a kinsman to us. But the one coming would also have to be a redeemer. Okay, he couldn't just be a kinsman, he had to be a kinsman redeemer. Look at Ephesians chapter 1. And let's see if Christ indeed was a redeemer. Okay, Ephesians chapter 1, verses 3 through 7. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who hath blessed us with all spiritual blessings in heavenly places in Christ, according as he had chosen us in him before the foundation of the world, that we should be holy and without blame before him in love, having predestinated us unto the adoption of children by Jesus Christ to himself, according to the good pleasure of his will. Verse 6, to the praise of the glory of his grace, wherein he hath made us accepted in the beloved, in whom we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of sins according to the riches of his grace. Was Christ a redeemer? Absolutely. So Job said, I need a daysman. I need a kinsman redeemer. And he was able to know through inspiration that his Redeemer liveth, that he was coming, that he would redeem man. And whenever Christ came to this earth, he took the form of flesh. He took on that humanity. He became a kinsman, but he also was a redeemer. So whenever you look at that term of a daysman, a kinsman redeemer, that's Christ for us. He was our kinsman redeemer to buy us back from the life of sin and to purchase us to God. He was there to buy us back. Okay, he wanted to get us back to God. Where Job saw no hope, there was just a gap there. He was able to see that Christ would fill that gap, and now we have a bridge back to God because our sins have separated us from God, but Christ came to give us forgiveness of sins, to fill that gap once again. So Job saw that help would come, and I'm so glad that this happened, because if Job was just left feeling lost and hopeless, there would be no hope for us today. But thankfully, he saw that help would come, and we've seen that fulfilled in Christ. And because Job saw this, because he knew that his Redeemer lived, because he stayed faithful to God, Job actually received more than he lost. Job actually received more than he lost. Go to the end of the book of Job and see what happened at the end of Job's life. Okay, Job remained faithful, but he got more than he lost. Job actually received double of everything that he lost. Look at Job 42, 12 through 13. So the Lord blessed the latter end of Job more than his beginning, for he had 14,000 sheep and 6,000 camels, and 1,000 yoke of oxen, and 1,000 she-donkeys. He had also 7 sons and 3 daughters. So notice, Job got double of everything. Okay, he lost so much. But because he remained faithful to God, he was blessed with more than what he lost. Now some beg the question, why didn't Job receive 20 children? Okay, he had 10 children to start with. Now he just has 10 more. Why didn't he receive 20 children? Is that really fulfilling that blessing there? And I feel that it does because, you know what? Whenever someone passes away, they don't just cease to exist. See, his first 10 children, they weren't gone. They were in paradise. I honestly believe that they were, because Job received 10 more children. So in total, how many children did Job really have? He had 20. See, God didn't bless him with just 20 more children to cover up the 10 and to double it, because those first 10, they're still there. They didn't just disappear. They didn't just vanish into nothingness. They went somewhere. I believe they went to paradise. And so why didn't Job receive 20 more children? It's because those first 10 were still there. So his children, in fact, did double. It's just the first 10 were no longer on the earth. But what does this mean for us? We as Christians today are going to receive more than we lose. And that's what that means for us today. Look at 1 Timothy chapter 4 and verse number 8. You know, we're going to have difficult times in this life, but we're going to receive more than we lose. 1 Timothy chapter 4 and verse number 8. For bodily exercise profiteth little, but godliness is profitable unto all things, having the promise of life that now is, and of that which is to come. Notice what Paul told Timothy there. You have a promise. You have a promise of a life to come. It's not a guess. It's not something that you have to worry about. It's a promise that God's given. You have a home eternal if you obey God. 1 Peter 1:4, we notice that it's to an inheritance incorruptible and undefiled, and that fadeth not away, reserved in heaven for you. So, I mean, you could lose your house in this life. You could lose all your physical blessings that you have. But if you remain faithful to God, you have a home that is incorruptible, undefiled, that fades not away, reserved in heaven for you. You have more than you lost. Sometime take the time to read Revelation 21 and 22. Read about this city. That's not an earthly city. It's not a physical city. It's a picture of heaven and what we will have there. But just read of all this description of this beautiful city that's there, about all the different gemstones and gold and things like that just are trying to picture the beauty for us. Will they physically be there? Likely not, but it's going to be that, it's just that picture of spiritual beauty that's there. And that you have God and Christ and the Holy Spirit there, and that God is going to be the light, that there's no darkness, there's no night. All these magnificent blessings, there's no wickedness or evil found in that place. Christians receive more than we lose. Okay, we may lose everything like Job did in this life, but if we remain faithful like Job did, then we will be blessed with more than we could ever imagine. And that's the lesson we learn from the life of Job, that we know our Redeemer lives. But the question tonight is, do you have that Redeemer? Are you a child of God? Have you accepted that Redeemer? You know, you have to come to Him. He wants all men everywhere to be saved, but you have to do your part. You have to come to Him. He wants to redeem you, to buy you back from the life of sin, but you've got to make that choice to do so by repenting of those past sins in your life, by turning and confessing Christ and being baptized for the remission of your sins. If you're here this evening and you've been a Christian, but you've strayed away, you've lost focus of the more that's out there, you're focused on the here and now and losing things here. No, we don't need to focus on that. We need to focus on God and on heaven, where we will be blessed with more and more. So won't you let go of those things today? If there's some sin in your life that you need to let go of, that needs to be repented of publicly, won't you do that today? Why don't you come as we stand and as we sing.